Hi again. In this video, we're going to talk about data organization and variables. So we get to get more in depth into variables and types of variables. So first of all, a variable is any characteristic being recorded or measured. Okay. So anything that we're recording, any piece of information is a variable. Okay. So we have two main types. We've got all variables up here. We have two main types, numerical and categorical. And you may also be familiar with their other names, the Q names. Numerical is also called quantitative. And categorical is also called qualitative. So I'll write those as well. These two can get mixed up, but think of quantity and quality. And these will be used interchangeably, so you can also use them interchangeably. Okay, so let's do the quantitative or numerical side first. There are two subsets of those. So we have continuous, so this is when we're using a number, as suggests by the word numerical, but I don't want to assume anything. Numerical is something measured by a number. And it's continuous or discrete. So continuous is usually that's something that is measured. So let's say inches. Maybe we have 3.15 inches. Okay, so we can have decimals. Continuous really means any number on a number line can be used. So usually these are measured. Versus discrete things are counted. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll get to some examples of these in a moment. And then on the other side, categorical, so for something that is not numerical, but it's some kind of quality or category. So most of these are regular categorical. You don't have to say regular categorical, that's just, most of them are regular categorical. But there are two other subtypes that come up sometimes. So ordinal, think ordered. So anything that is a ranking or an ordering. And remember, sometimes you can see numbers over here that aren't numerical, and so we'll talk about the difference between those. So think of a time when you've seen on a survey, like rank this from 1 to 5. Even though that uses a number, it's still more of a categorical ordinal variable. So like say 1 would be least satisfied category and 5 is the most satisfied category. So this would be rank from 1 to 5. That's an example. Could also be like stars, 4 stars, 3 stars. Something like that. That's an ordinal variable. And then another specific type of categorical is identifier. Now an identifier has to be unique to the individual or the subject. So I'm going to write unique to the subject. It has to identify the subject. So if we knew this piece of information, we would know which subject we were talking about. Okay, so an example of this would be at PCC, a G number. If I know someone's G number, if I have the G number, I can identify who that person is. Another thing that's unique is email addresses. You can't have, at PCC, two people can't have the same email address. Otherwise, who would it go to? So email address, and in general, two people don't, usually in their sharing, don't have the same email address. Email address is another identifier. So something like gender, let's say if we know someone identifies as male or female or non-binary, that does not identify who the person is, right? It's a characteristic or maybe an identity that they have, but it's not an identifier, okay? So an identifier must be unique to that subject or case, okay? Okay, so to explore this a little bit more, let's use an example. Let's look at just a data table. So we have some information about some, looks like people, although we don't know a lot of the context here. That can be a challenge of statistics, of homework questions when you don't have a lot of context. But let's look at what we have. So A here is what is represented by the rows. Okay, so let's look at the rows. Rows go across. I see ID, and then, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we've got a bunch of pieces of information, right? So usually in a data table, each row is one subject or case. Okay, so let me put rows over here. Rows right there. Okay, so each row has the data for one subject. And remember, we've seen a couple different words for this: subject, case, or observational unit. Sometimes that seems a little dehumanizing if it's a human, so subject might be the best if we're talking about people. So each row is one subject and has all the information about them. And then what is represented in the columns? So these are the columns. Columns going down, and we can see gender. So these have headings: smoke, award, exercise, TV. These are the variables. So usually each variable will be in a column. Each column has one variable. Okay, now I might not know everything about the context of these variables, but let's take a look. So gender, I can see, is male, female, or non-binary. We've got this identifier, 1, 2, 3, 4, some kind of ID number. Smoke, I assume, is smoking, yes or no. Award is maybe which type of award you would rather win: Olympic Award, Academy Award, Nobel Award. Exercise, 10, 4, 14, 3. Now this is where we need units, right? So I'm going to guess maybe this is like hours per week, but I don't know that for sure, but this is why units are really important. Same with TV. Is that hours per week? How much TV someone watches? I'm going to put a question. Hours per day, month? I don't know. That's why units are so important. GPA, I think we can relate to that one. You can relate to that one, I'm sure, is what someone's GPA. Again, I'm assuming these are college students, so this is college GPA, but it could be high school. Pulse, pulse rates, maybe is this beats per minute? I'm not sure. So I will always do my best to give you, except in this example today, give you the units so that you can add the units on your statistics. And then birth, I'm going to guess this is birth order. Okay, so given all of that, let's go through the next part here. B says, list the numerical or quantitative, and those mean the same thing, numerical or quantitative variables. Also specify whether each is discrete or continuous. Okay, so let's just go in order. Okay, ID. Now, it is a number, but it's really not numerical. This is more of an identifier. Gender, that's not numerical. Smoking, not numerical. I'm going to wait till we get to some numbers. Okay, exercise. That appears to be numerical, right? Especially if it's in hours per week. So numerical, I'm going to say exercise. And even though we don't know for sure, I'm going to assume this is hours per week. And now we need to think about, is that discrete or continuous? Okay, could someone exercise 10.5 hours a week? Yes. Could they exercise 10.33, 10.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours per week? They could. So we could say this is a continuous. Sometimes it's ambiguous. Sometimes it could be either one, right? So there's not always one right answer in terms of this. Is it counted versus measured? If it's time, we might say we're measuring it. Especially if you can have any value in between, I would lean towards continuous. So I'm going to call that one continuous. Okay, so exercise. Now TV is going to be similar to that, right? Because it's a very similar hours per week. Are we only counting full hours? Then we could maybe say it's discrete, but theoretically it could be any number of minutes converted into hours. So I'm going to say continuous as well. Okay, GPA. That is also numerical. And GPA kind of is its own units, or it's its own special thing. It doesn't have any additional units. Again, I would say that this one is continuous because we can have a decimal on there. It's an average, right? So it's your number of points you get for a grade times the number of credits, and then it's averaged out by the number of credits. Okay, pulse also looks like numerical. And I'm going to say beats per minute. I should spell it out somewhere. Okay, beats per minute. Is this measured or counted? Again, it could be depending on how you, it could say, well, I'm counting this. It depends on how finely you can measure something. If you can get a decimal, then we might call that, continuous. So again, this one really could go either way. I'm going to say, well, it's reported here. It looks like maybe it's reported as discrete. But if we can measure it more finely, then I'm going to say continuous. So we don't have anything that is, we do have birth order also, but I'm going to say call that categorical. So what is something numerical that would be counted? That would be discrete, because we didn't end up with any discrete things here. So it would be something where you couldn't have a decimal value. So it would be something you're counting, like, so let's say a discrete example. How about the number of classes you're taking? That's an example of a discrete variable, because you would be counting, I'm taking 1 class, I'm taking 2 classes, I'm taking 3 classes. Can you take 2.5 classes? Not really. You're signed up for it or not. So that would be an example of a discrete variable. Okay, then one more on this page in this video. List the categorical or qualitative, and then if they're regular, we don't have to add anything, but if they are ordinal or identifier, we will also list that. Okay, so let's see. Well, first we have our ID number. And is that an ordinal or identifier? That is an identifier. If I bring this back down, that is unique to each subject. And if we said, okay, we want to know about person number 3, we could identify who that person is. Sometimes it's a name. So this is an identifier. Okay. On the, let's move that up. On the Kiki Booba survey, you may have noticed I said it was anonymous, and I did not include an identifier. So that was to purposely make it so that you're not identified. So that if there's no identifier variable, then it's anonymous. Okay, whoops, my computer screen just blacked out. Hopefully we're still recording here. I think we are. Okay, so then the next categorical or qualitative is gender. And that is not ordinal. There's no order to genders. And it's also not an identifier. I wouldn't know who the person was. Smoking. Whether someone smokes or not, yes or no. Also wouldn't identify them, and it's not ordinal. Award. We see some different award types. I don't think there's an order to those awards, and also not an identifier. And then we did exercise, TV, GPA, pulse. Birth, you might have noticed, you might be wondering about this one. Birth order. And sometimes it depends on what you're going to do. Oops, let me move this up. Sometimes it depends on what you're going to do with the data and how you define it. Like if you're going to average something, if you're going to calculate a statistic, then I would, that's an average, then I would say that is numerical. Birth order is thinking of like, okay, someone was born first in their family, in the kids in their family, or second or third. And so we wouldn't necessarily average that. It doesn't really make sense to average birth order. So I actually would think of it as more of an ordinal, because first was born before second, second was born before third. So I would say that that's an ordinal categorical. Okay, so there are some things that are numbers. Let's put this here. It's a number, but it's categorical. A couple other things like that are zip code. It's a number, but you wouldn't average zip codes together. That wouldn't tell you anything meaningful. And same thing with like phone numbers. So just because you see a number, be careful. Still got to think about it, whether it's categorical or numerical. Okay, so that's our video on data organization and variables, and I'll see you in the next video.